Hey neighbor, thanks for checking into another episode of 7 on Sunday right here on ARTV. My name is John, and this series is now 7 years old. And to celebrate this fact, the first 7 episodes of 2020 are all sequels to some of the most popular and viewer-loved episodes of all time. Today we're doing my 3rd annual installment of albums I enjoyed, liked, or loved that critics dismissed or hated. I'm saying it here, out in the open right now, because obviously that wouldn't all fit in the title. Give me a break, they only give me 100 characters, okay? All of the critic scores that you'll be seeing in the transitions are lifted directly from Metacritic, a site that you can think of kind of like a Rotten Tomatoes if you're not familiar with it already. It's an aggregate source, meaning it takes all of the verified critic scores and puts them into an out of 100 rating. So, to reiterate to the peanut gallery, Metacritic is not a critic website, it's not an individual, and they do not give out ratings, they collect them. Simmer, simmer, simmer. Okay, John, let's get right into this countdown. Keep in mind that obviously everything you're gonna see here is opinion-based, so feel free to add your own picks down below or to disagree. Don't forget to drop kick that like button while you're at it, and let's see what albums I disagreed with my fellow critics on.
The battle is won with all these things that I've done.
One of the most influential albums of the 21st century and the rock and even post-punk revival movement of the 2000s decade was initially somewhat panned by critics, scraping by with an insultingly low weighted score of 66 out of 100. What the fuck, critics? Not cool! A lot of the early punches unfairly called them style over substance, whereas I, a man of reason, would say that the flashiness that lives within the music of Hot Fuss goes down that way because it's meant to. Without any hesitation, I'll call this one of the most invigorating debut albums of all time. Not even blowing smoke, it's just genuinely that electric from top to bottom. No skippable tracks, plus a smoke show of deep cuts with some rather tense narratives to back up the heart-pounding performances from all the band members. Yeah, sign me up. They swung for the fences with some massive anthems, but every single moment works and continues to work as the music finds its home in new generations. You've gotta love it when the same publications that initially slammed their work go on to include Hot Fuss in their best of the decade or even best of all time lists, but we'll let it slide and chalk it up to changing opinions. However, my opinion has only changed in the sense that I love it even more now than I did back in 2005 when I first found it, thanks to their hit songs being all over the radio. Hating Kings of Leon seems to be the favorite pastime of holier-than-thou music fans and writers in the world. Like, fuck those sellouts, right? Sex on Fire? Are you kidding me? Could they pander harder? There's no redemption after that one, so don't even bother putting out new music. We already know it sucks. I'm not exactly a diehard fan of the group, and I actually initially hated them in 2008 after hearing Sex on Fire non-stop on my local rock station. Granted, I was 16 at that time and was taught that sex was evil unless you're married, so maybe it having sex in the title had something to do with that? But no, I found more of their music and gave them more chances starting around 2010. And fast forward a few years and we have Walls. We Are Like Love Songs, an acronym that continues their 5 syllables in the album title trend that's always been present. Critics were not kind to this thing, with many tearing into it so far as to call it soulless, like it was lost without a vision. Many seemed to mock and jeer as they considered much of the record to either be radio fluff or forgettable filler, and really, I couldn't disagree more. To me, this album still sounds pretty fresh, even if it's not an overwhelmingly good album. There's a lot to like here, from the fervent guitars that drive Find Me, to the dominating ode to a friend Reverend that tears right through you, or even Muchacho, a song that I really praised when I reviewed it back in 2016, and it still holds up as a great change of pace, shock to the feels, a vital piece of this album. Critics can continue to hate Kings of Leon all they want. I just don't like it when these lines get crossed where it feels like they want you to feel bad if you've even got a single song of theirs in a playlist. Let it go. They're still better than a lot of shit that's clogging the alternative and rock airwaves, and I think Waste a Moment was proof that they've still got the knack for writing a smash hit.
Hit the sidewalk, and this is how it starts.
For as quickly as Young the Giant were standing up and making themselves known in the alternative music world, they were simultaneously being knocked off their horse, since critics didn't appear to be wowed by their style at all, with publications like the infamous Pitchfork going out of their way to slam this down with a 2.7 out of 10 rating. as per usual, fuck you and your pretentious writer's pitchfork. I'm contractually obligated to say that due to my hate for you. For those willing to hear an album that intelligently layers melancholy with optimism, tied together even further with a magnetic chemistry between bandmates, these young giants come highly recommended from yours truly. I've seen this described as a singles only skip the rest type of album, and I guess that's an opinion. It's not a right one, but it's an opinion. And I guess that somebody never heard how fucking majestic Garen's is, or maybe perhaps the lingering touch 12 fingers leaves with just how descriptive it is. And just, my god, Samir Ghadia's voice is one of my favorites of all time. It's angelic as hell, and yes, that was an intentional contradiction. Young the Giant worked with award-winning producer Joe Ciccarelli, and according to the band, he kicked their asses into gear and forced them to expand their horizons, to grow as musicians, and to push themselves. That hard work pays off in the form of this excellent debut self-titled record that keeps the listener dancing, rocking, and devastated. Also, just because I never get to talk about this album, let me just say that I love so many of the other songs, like St. Walker, I Got, and Strings, but nothing compares to the happiness I feel while listening to one of my favorite opening tracks of all time, Apartment. In fact, at this point, I would say it's one of my favorite songs of all time if I'm being honest with myself. I still have it saved to my main Spotify playlist like 10 years later. The build up to the chorus is perfect, the storytelling puts you in the narrator's point of view masterfully, and the tempered drums match the jolting guitar momentum in an indescribable way. Like, good god, when the guitars come crashing through the wall at the end of the track, I just lose my mind air guitaring every single time. Forget the negative reception to the self-titled Young the Giant album and approach it with an open mind. I think your level-headedness will definitely be rewarded, and even though it's not one of my favorite albums ever or anything like that, it definitely has its flaws. A 58 out of 100, I can't agree with at all. CATFISH and the Bottlemen have been through the ringer when it comes to critics chewing up and spitting out their records. And after two abysmal follow-up records, The Ride and The Balance, that essentially copy and pasted lesser versions of their debut, I get it. What I cannot agree with is the hate right out of the gate for that very album, The Balcony, an explosive, reckless record that recalls some of the glory days of the UK rock scene with flaming hooks, roaring vocal moments, and plenty of smashing guitar licks that get me in the mood to dance or just sing back every word at the top of my lungs in a festival crowd or something. From the opening delicacies of Homesick that start the album off on the right foot, to the impossible to ignore Cocoon that's actually a really nice off-kilter love song, and of course Pacifier. Whew, good lord, please don't tell me you're not screaming right along with them as they build up to that chorus and the "but babe." Hey, you know, if it's not your style, it's cool. We can't be friends, but I mean, it's totally fine, don't sweat it. I guess what I'm trying to prove here is that CATFISH and the Bottlemen have loads of talent, and despite the fact that I just feel like they're burying themselves alive at this point, that does not change the fact that The Balcony perfectly captures fleeting youth and life on the rocks in a magical but familiar way. How exactly did Post Malone go from being murdered by the critic sphere in 2018 to getting praised left and right in 2019? That I can't really answer, because while I personally do agree that Hollywood's Bleeding is a better album than BEERBONGS and BENTLEYS, is it really that different of a vibe to merit a 51 out of 100 versus a 79 for Hollywood? BEERBONGS kinda says it all in its title. It's low-key trashy, Post is all over the place musically, and there's definitely some really dumb moments on the album, but even at his worst, Post still manages to come across pretty likable, which isn't something that I can necessarily say for many artists in his lane. I don't even know if I should say in his lane, because Post really isn't riding too many waves, he's kinda riding out his own. Banging out hit after hit with different moods or tempos while still maintaining control over the album and letting people know this is you isn't something you do in your sleep. Yet the goofy doof Post Malone makes it feel way too easy as he pumps out these anthems that are gonna continue to get played in the clubs and beyond for a long time. Are there songs on the album I don't like? Absolutely. Zack and Codeine, Same Bitches, Sorry to My Best Friend that somehow loves that song, and hell, even Psycho is kind of a snoozer. But out of all 17 tracks on BEERBONGS and BENTLEYS, I can name a whole lot more that I do enjoy and that I'd be down to get a trashy kind of drunk to anytime. I've said it before in my reaction to the worst albums of all time from Metacritic, but what the fuck is up with Sum 41 catching a suplex out of nowhere for this really solid album, Screaming Bloody Murder? critics collectively came together and tag-teamed this 2011 outing for a jaw-dropping 47 out of 100. Yikes. 2011 was not a good time for the Canadian rockers. They were still a bit directionless without the lovely Brown sound shredding the axe. Island Records didn't promote them at all and dropped the band, of course, after this album flopped because there was no promo, and Derek was facing the demons of addiction, which almost led to the complete destruction and downfall of the band. Somehow in their most dire hour, they came together to nail down a fierce album that has a lot of intensity and deep-seated emotional roots. Is it easy to see through the smoke and mirrors game that some critics claim they were playing? I don't exactly think so, especially not with that trilogy of songs known as A Dark Road Out of Hell in the mix. I will say this, yeah, the album's a little bit too long, and they could have easily cut a few of those tracks that keep the pace more unstable than a glass house in an earthquake, but you know what? Even though it's not the golden monument many thought it would be, it's certainly not the red-headed stepchild like a 47 out of 100 would imply. Extra, extra, read all about it. Music critic loses all credibility after being outed as a Nickelback stan. The headlines are already pouring in. It's glorious, and I'll just sit back and take the L on this one if you want, because I know that at an objective level, this album is pretty bad, if not downright terrible in places. But, a huge but here, I still enjoy All the Right Reasons by Nickelback overall. I'll go prepare my own funeral now. There's so many questions probably running through your head right now, as you've already thrown your device of choice in disbelief. How? Why? How do you pronounce Chad Kroeger's name? And all of these are valid concerns. I hear you, but rest assured, this channel has not been hacked, and no one is standing with a gun pointed at my head off screen. Don't test your luck, bitch. Now tell them you love Nickelback. Well, none other than the one that he's always pointing at me, but he's harmless. To oversimplify the entire situation, I grew up with this album, and it was one of the first 20 or so albums that I ever listened to in full. So I'm always gonna have some sense of nostalgic attachment to it. And no, I don't want your "I'm so sorry" comments for that being one of my first albums, because it was surrounded by some fantastic records from Green Day, The White Stripes, Weezer, System of a Down, AFI, Wolfmother, and too many others to name. All the Right Reasons is an album very clearly splits its time between pandering to the radio-friendly sound with the now meme-to-death song that I still unironically love, Photograph, Far Away, which is actually my girlfriend's favorite Nickelback song since we were in an LDR for 2 years, and If Everyone Cared, which is probably the best single out of the bunch in terms of overall composition. They kept the harder hitting guitars in the mix and they didn't throttle down entirely, but it's a crowd pleaser with a good vibe that I can still occasionally jam to. Obviously, we do have to address why critics hated this album, and it mainly involved the trashy dime-a-dozen lyrics, obvious pandering to multiple markets, and the cock rock attitude that felt a little too jacked up on Canadian whiskey for its own good. Those are all very valid complaints, and you're not going to see too many music fans defend this album outside of some very specific circles, but even at 15 plus years old, I still can't kick this old habit. Savin' Me is a touching ballad with a great guitar solo. Side of a Bullet never fails to get me amped up at the gym and is a nice tribute to Dimebag Darrell. Next Contestant is just funny as hell to me at this point, but I can still dig it. And to my first love, Animals, I can now finally say this as a 28-year-old man, but I finally understand the lyrics. I tried to tell her dad it was her mouth that I was kissing. Little 13-year-old me in 2005 was like, what else would he be kissing? Her shoulder? Thanks again for tuning into another sequel episode of 7 on Sunday. Stay tuned for more of those in the coming weeks. Drop a like on this video if you haven't done so already. Subscribe for the love of music. If you didn't catch the first 2 episodes of albums that I enjoyed that critics dismissed, then tap these cards here. Find me on social media at all of these links here in the description, and I will see you soon for more on ARTV.